Welcome to Inside the Set with Set Decor. Inside the Set is a series that focuses on the design and decor of stories that excite us and ignite our imaginations, where we get to discuss the collaborations between production designers and set decorators, and hear firsthand accounts of how those works of art came to be, from their inception to ideas on the page through completion, where we sit in the dark and experience them collectively.
Welcome to Inside the Set from Set Decor. I'm Leslie Rollins SDSA, and I'm joined here today with Emma Rudkin, the set decorator, and Molly Hughes, the production designer of the harrowing film 13 Lives. I want to say welcome to both of you.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
I have to say, I watched this movie, and harrowing is exactly the word that I would use. I didn't know all the details, and it's just marvelous. Molly, let me start with you. How did you become attached to this project?
This is my second film with Ron. We were doing reshoots on, I did the film Hillbilly Elegy with him, and then he became attached to the script. And I think immediately, maybe because I was in the room, we was starting to talk about how to make the film. And I had done some cave work on Harry Potter a little bit, not to this extent, obviously, but there was some cave work on there. So I had some idea of what the pitfalls of caves and designs of caves, and really spent months before we were able to go to Australia, kind of just diving deeper and deeper, no pun intended, or I guess, into the script and the details of it.
Emma, how did you come about working on this show?
Well, I have been working in the Australian film industry, and specifically the Queensland film industry, for many moons now. So I interviewed with Molly, and it was a really a very easygoing, connected interview from day one. It's a complete career highlight, of course, to work on a Ron Howard feature, and Molly being more or less responsible for sort of art directing my child's childhood. The series was really, it was a joy to be able to meet her, let alone work with her.
What were your initial conversations with Ron? This is obviously a very heavy research film. You're recreating a reality.
There were two parts to it. You know, the architectural cave part of it, we were designing from scratch. I mean, we had access to a scan. We couldn't go to Thailand. We could start there. We couldn't go to Thailand because of COVID, but we had a scan of the cave from a National Geographic documentary. You know, we had this idea of it being kind of like a haunted house, a living, breathing, full of water haunted house. And the actual cave inside didn't have, it was a different kind of material. So it was very sandy. But the part that we did have to get right, which Emma, shined and helped, really guided us through, was the cultural aspects for everything that was happening outside of the cave, with the two base camps and the spiritual aspects and all of that. And so that part we did have a lot of research. You kind of had to check your research, because, we would discover things we'd have these beautiful photographs, and then you would discover they were staged. That event was staged. That didn't actually happen, or was staged for the camera, or there were political conflicts. You had to be very careful about certain things because of political differences within the country as well. So, and then I think the religion, especially, Emma really dove into that, like the nuances. You're in northern Thailand, that's Buddhism, but there's also animism, and there's sort of layers of cultural differences to what Buddhism means, where, depending on where you are, which I'm sure Emma can talk a lot about.
Emma, that the recreating Thailand and the culture must have been quite a challenge. Did you have Thai advisors and buyers and all of that?
Yes. Yeah. So it was a challenge, and like a lot of things we do, there's an enormous amount of research involved. I knew that would be the case going in. I really enjoy that aspect of any production. I really love the research aspect. I do a deep dive into it. I love primary resource stuff. I find the more I can do in that prep world, it really does inform everything it means you can make decisions on the fly that will mostly be correct, or at least you certainly know what things shouldn't be. So the prep work was really important. Ron bought in screens and had them all throughout the office spaces, all throughout the art spaces, and they just looped documentary footage, whether it was the PBS Thai footage, National Geo, and everywhere you went throughout the day, you just, it would just be these subtle sort of peripheral reminders, and that does sink in over time. And you sort of every now and then you'll walk past and go, oh, that's a fertilizer sack, not a rice sack. We had fantastic Thai advisors. Lek was just incredible and really just integral, absolutely integral to our process in Australia.
Are there any people who had been at the actual event?
Nobody who we worked with in Australia other than the divers. And of course, that resource was extraordinary. It was very humbling to be able to access all of that and to have people like Rick Stanton, John Valanthan, Jason Mellison, all who were happy to discuss nuances of things like how you'd coil, air hose, what certain things were. If we had a question about any of the diving elements, the comms gear, the tactical gear, any of that stuff. Also, all of the dewatering equipment to a certain extent. The divers who were the rescuers were there on hand, and that's just something you can't buy that. That's incredible. From the Thai angle, we had Living Films who were assisted with us, and they went as far as going to northern Thailand and the Chiang Rai region to get specific elements for us. They also reached out to the Chiang Rai hospitals so that for our hospital scenes, we had the exact sheeting and linen and pillows and gowns. Huge amount of graphics advice, as you can imagine. And we had, they were able to reach out to companies who did the printing for various groups and companies that, so all of the scales, proportions, colours, materials, even sort of, we did a lot of printing here, of course, enormous amount of graphics.
Two big things that Ron pushed for was one, having this Thai art director named Lek Chinsidawat, who came and he was with me and with Emma and I from the get-go, through filming. And the other was allowing us to bring a large container full and packed full over from Thailand, full of things that Emma, as much as Emma could have shoved into it, from all the tents, chairs, down to the umbrellas, the beautiful umbrella scene. At first, Ron kind of said, well, aren't the tents the tents? And we were really like, no, they're not. They're totally different. And he trusted us. And really went to bat and backed us up on, the financial. Obviously, it's a financial hit to bring all that, but he really did just allow it to happen. And then once it was there, he realized, and he was like, of course, I do see that there is that all of those layers add up to feeling like you're in Thailand.
One of the things that struck me in looking at it was this sea of blue tents. There were obviously other colors in there, but there was a predominantly cool tone to it. I'm wondering if the layout of those were based on research photos or if there was conscious color choices made.
Yeah, and that did end up becoming quite a conscious decision how that was laid out. The reference photos of the actual base camps did the blue was very dominant throughout. There were all the other colours and the stripes. However, at the top of the base camp, one of the divers at the cave entry, the blues were dominant. We had the seals. It was sort of I guess as corporate as you could get in that world. So we played a lot of the blues up here. And Molly, I remember we sort of did a pass of or layout down at the family area, down at the bottom of the base camp where most of the tents were. And we used a lot of blue there, but the thought was to maybe introduce some more of the colours. And you and Ron thought that we might beef up some extra colours that were all legitimate, on-site, used. And so we did that. We wriggled those tents around for days, and we eventually, had a look at drone footage of how that sat. And it's interesting what the light does under the tents too. We had kilometres of festooning, and the colours of the tents, and the orange one in particular that was over the electrical authority group, who were all in orange, was really, and sort of the vibes under the yellows, the reds, it all glowed quite differently, and it was quite gem-like. It was really, really beautiful. And so they were put into areas of hope, like food, family areas, those sorts of things. And we kept the blues for the tacticians and the SEALs and the USAF groups.
The contrast between the interior of the cave and then you come outside to this life that's going on was really marvelous.
Thank you. That was very purposeful in terms of us and sound too. We wanted to, it gets colder, darker, as you start to lose electricity in the cave, the deeper you get.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sound of the bubbles in your own head kind of takes over too.
While we're here, before we start addressing the elephant in the room, that is the cave, I'd like to talk about the other elephant in the room, which is the rain.
Yes.
Oh
yes.
my Lord, I watched this and thought, I'm so glad I didn't do that movie. Not because, just because you had been wet the entire time. Everything was wet the entire time.
Yeah.
We did have that challenge, that added challenge too, Molly, with it was not just the rain towers and the incredible sort of fatness of the rain. It was like very, very wet rain. We were also inundated with what we've come to call a weather event here. And we got torrential rains a week out from shoot at the base camp, which literally flooded the place and cut off access to our set, which had obviously begun. And so you'd be standing there sort of at the edge of it. And we were literally, you'd watch pallets of construction materials sort of float off down the river. And then you'd sort of go and try and rescue certain things or just check on them, because that cargo out of Thailand was so valuable. We had that one container and everything in it had a very specific purpose and was correct. And we were told that we couldn't go into the area because that was pointed out that where we were, spiders, snakes, huntsman spiders in particular, float on top of the water. And if you're walking through it, you're the higher ground. And so it was just not to go near it until it subsided. And when it sort of went down, all of our dressings were intact. It had been secured properly. That was fantastic. The silver lining of that is it left really great ground cover. And you got a very real sense of how tactical pelican cases, all those sorts of things, what they looked like with a muddy tide mark. And we used all of that, and it just settled the ground. And it rained off and on screen a lot. It was very wet. It was very challenging.
In the rain and in the puddles, and in the mud, the only thing you could do is lay more track down or lay more plywood down, and so that we did that, and it just felt, we were sort of weaving real life and fake rain together.
Yeah, it was pretty astonishing. And I kept thinking, oh my God, were there doubles and triples on things, or whatever it was just wet?
Yeah, we moved a lot of stuff around because there weren't doubles and triples on things in the sense that the base camp was so extensive. And Molly did say it would be wise to treat this as a 360-degree set, because cameras will go everywhere, and they did. And we had, and including the ground cover, that was its own story. And sure enough, there was, quite a bit of camera work along the ground, boots, car wheels, scooters, just to explain that part of the journey. So we really did treat that as full 360. So we would move tents and items from A to B on a fairly regular basis. But that was sort of an initial challenge that we tackled, knowing we were up for that. And so our very first pass was to dress the site in its entirety and then work out what our pack down strategy would be, so that we could give a sense of amping up activity, reducing activity, when families left, what was left. We just had all those bases covered, so we physically knew what they looked like, and we could also work out how long it was going to take, because it was always going to take a long time. It was one of those films where there's no way to do it other than to do it, for almost for real.
Yeah, to think that it would started at someone's farm, where we go out to this person's farm, and it was perfectly laid out, the farm, to have this long path. It had a long track. It was a dirt track at that time, to a grassy field, keep going on the track and up around a turn to an even bigger grassy field with a hillside. And it was like meant for our base camp mountain, cave entrance, diver camp location. And then so we just started running with it as soon as we had it, and it was great. We found it really early.
Was this your first time working with this DP?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
It looked marvelous, the whole movie. I'm
Wonderful.
sure you must be very happy with it. I saw an interview with him where he talked about the quality of light, how it was different under the tents than it was inside the cave, and obviously, those distinctions. Were there any requests that he made that you needed to fulfill, or was he pretty easygoing about things?
He was pretty easygoing, right? I mean, we were just in sync. We were in sync from the beginning. One of the things was I had an illustrator start early on. It started with lighting the cave, and we worked backwards from there, I think. And the illustrator, we're like, how do you light when there's not supposed to be any light? How far can we take the idea that there's electricity into this cave?
They actually run power during the actual rescue in 2018.
Yes.
They actually run power into the cave with work lights and that sort of thing.
They did, up to a certain point, and we probably stretched that a little bit. Ours went to the third chamber. Where Ron is standing now, that's where you go into the water, kind of for the first time. Fully, you can be fully submerged in the water. So this was their internal base camp. It's where they put the kids on the Skedco, and then this is chamber one. Yeah, this is chamber one. So the other one is this sort of smaller internal base camp. And then from there, that was it. After that, it was only torches. And I think we might have had one tunnel that had a dry area that we had some lights in. But other than that, it was, this is where the light ended. So we had this kind of light in here that we talked to him about, which then could contrast with the fluorescence in the tents.
And we did actually bring in some of those. We made sure with some of that festooning, we did get certain amount of lengths out of Thailand from Home Pro, which is where a lot of the lighting was sourced for the actual rescue. And there was sort of a lot of work lighting that could swap out as well. So we started with original and matched as best we could, because there was kilometres of it. And the work light situation was based on the fact that when Molly said it was sort of maybe a bit stretched to get us into some of the further chambers, we made sure it was probably work lights that could have been bought in. And it just got darker and darker and dimmer and dimmer. And then the explosion of light out at the base camp was, a huge contrast. But we had a big practical electrics team on this one for set deck. We had, at any given time, we had six people running, set deck lighting for Prac-Alex. There was so much of it. It was really integral.
I'm also, when I was watching the film, I was also very impressed with the props department, because I would imagine, I don't know what the customs are in Australia. I know here props and set dressing, set decorating are two different departments. Did you have a lot to do with the I don't know, hand props, I guess, the rescue. So much of it, there's a fine line between
Yeah.
set dressing and practical props.
Yeah, well, so in Australia they're two separates here as well, but we very much collaborate, and there was a lot of crossover with all of the ceremonial and spiritual elements, the food vessel, small things like the incense, uh, the marigold and chrysanthemum elements. We brought in some artificial ceremonial items for specific setups. This one here for Kruger was very diving into that research. The candles, we bought in a lot of candles, and that was another sort of question. Well, surely we can sort of get the candles here. And while you can, there's just the proportions and the colors are different. And when you've got them held like that, and they are so important spiritually for these ceremonies and the praying and also the offerings, it was absolutely wonderful to have the real thing. And we were, schooled on groupings of incense and making sure that everybody had the correct groupings of incense for offerings and holding. It had to be specific to, and our groupings of 3 and 5 were in keeping with the spiritual connection with the mountain, praying for safety for the princess to let them out. And that's how that came about. And Kruber, who is that specific person there, was also, he's a direct descendant, I believe, of the lover of the princess who laid down to create the mountain. And it goes that the water inside the cave is her blood running. And so there was that sort of situation where Kruber was in there praying in the belly of the princess.
It's a marvelous job of research.
Yeah.
Putting all of that together.
Emma's not giving herself enough credit there. You see all the gear that like Colin Farrell's wearing, all the little things. Like, I think we maybe underestimated just how detailed it all was in how many layers and all of that. So that became a full-time undertaking.
Absolutely, I'm sure it was. I have a question about the Sleeping Princess. It was so beautiful.
We're not allowed to show the princess. I think it's a clearance issue. So we don't have any photos of her.
No, there's no photos
She's
of it.
The videos, though. You can see her in the videos. Yeah.
To me, that was one of the important elements in the story, was the Sleeping Princess. Was that statue carved in Australia, the sculpture?
Yes, it was. We had we had someone go and take really good photos of the real one. And so we had that, thankfully, because it was a pretty great copy of the original, of the real.
Molly, we briefly touched on locations, but I'd just like to go back and sort of clear up one thing. The cave exterior, the actual hole that you walk into, did that exist, or did you cut a hole in a hill?
No, we built that from scratch. It's scaffolding, and then no, we were just in a farm. There was a farm. There was a bank so the scaffolding layers, and then greenery and the stairs, and then building the cave on top of it.
Right. It's all seamless. It's absolutely seamless. You would never believe there were visual effects even done as a movie viewer. I mean, I watched it on a big screen TV, so I probably didn't get the full theatrical experience, but it's really well done, I must say.
So that takes you like to the railing where the bikes are. That's part of the set here. The view from the bikes is the set in the stage of chamber one. So yeah, this is all built.
In the fields that are flooded, the water diversion and the flooded fields, where did all of that water come from? I mean, that was just astonishing.
Huge trench kind of with and one of those big pumps. And then visual effects replicated the pumps. I think there were 3 of them, and extended our big pool of water out to look like it was flooding the whole field. And
Right.
so then where we built the rice sort of shack where everyone met, that was in a large field. And we did sort of one small square of rice and flooded that, and they extended all of that as well. Because we intended to go to Thailand for that part of it. And we intended to go to Thailand for this water diversion as well. And we didn't get to do that for either of those situations.
Well, whatever you did here, it worked very well. I mean, it all worked seamlessly together. All right, let's talk about the gorilla.
Okay.
The cave, for God's sakes, and the water tanks. You knew you were going to have to build all of that from the beginning. But my question when watching it, and then even looking at the still photos, especially when you see the divers going through the very, very tight areas, the tunnel that's just about the right size for one person to get through. How did that work? What was the physical layout of that, and where was the camera?
So originally, so there were 4 tanks that we built that were 100 feet long. And those were just so there were the sets that are submerged, fully submerged, right? That are the tunnels. Then there are these sets this one has 2 feet of water in it, chamber one. The most water that any of the chambers had is 5 feet. So those sets have their own tanks built around the sections of the set that are going to be fully submerged in water. Those do not have filtration, and so there was not good visibility underwater. But the fully submerged tunnels, where you can see the actors, we had this a very elaborate filtration system that then allowed to keep the water clear so that Ron could shoot it. The biggest thing probably was figuring out how challenging we could make them and keep them safe at the same time. So we had 4 big long sets. We had a long set that was called the stalactite tunnel, where Semon dies, where he dies, and where Chris loses his line. So that was about 80 or 95 feet long, I think, that set. And it was designed very specifically around those events. And then everything else was just swimming, enough room to swim. Because if you imagine 2 divers with fins and their hands in front of them, that's already almost 20 feet because of the fins. So you had to make tunnels really long in order to get a good run. What happened was the actors decided they wanted to do their own stunts.
Yeah.
And that was great, except it meant the only time that they had to sort of pack out their schedule then, which meant we were shooting on weekends. And it meant suddenly getting a couple of, sets ready earlier. And then we had crews working around the clock to accommodate. But what it also meant was those actors started carrying the camera themselves at certain point. Ron realized the spaces were so tight that he would have Colin or Vigo hold the camera out in front of them and swim through. And that's how they got some of those really tight shots. And then sometimes, like, there's a long tunnel that's very flat. We had a big section of that with the side out. There was no, so the camera could always go along the side of that one. And then we would have camera ports that would come out to allow for pass by or looking down or things like that. So it was all kind of pretty well planned.
Did you use any actual rocks on the water sets?
We did only a little, for dressing, like small boulder type things for dressing. It's a make or break situation, right? If you don't have good sculptors and painters when you're doing a cave, you're really trouble. So
This was a very interdepartmental dependent production, because
yes.
that special effects, is that a set cable or is that a set dressing cable? And you're kind of lucky in that it doesn't really matter, does it?
No,
Yeah,
there's
does it?
true. You didn't have to worry about hiding cable anywhere. That was
Yes,
for
that's
sure.
Yeah,
right.
that, oh my goodness, you don't have to hide cable. In fact, you
No,
invite.
but that, that comes from Ron. I have to say he puts the design first in so many ways, where he wants everyone to make sure that the authenticity is so important to him.
Yeah,
And we did that right in the art department. So everyone had everything filtered through us, and they would ask Emma questions. If someone didn't know anything, knew something, the questions came to Emma,
And
so
that was very, it was interesting to have a special effect. Like the specials department were very prominent at our asset sale at the end. It was just so much of it. And we did have a lot of we did bring in a lot of lay flat, a lot of valves. All the dewatering pumps were legitimate. We did end up doing quite a bit of fabrication too, because the sheer weight of these things. I mean, one of those Salzer submersible pump heads is about 300 kilograms, which is I don't know what that is in
a lot.
pounds, 600 and something.
600 pounds, right?
Yeah, huge. And hence the sort of, 10 Navy SEALs and the really bent bamboo pole to carry it in and out of the cave, which is what they did. So we fabricated a few of those from the real thing. We palletized that in, and we fabricated those. We fabricated a lot of the air cylinders as well, because the tanks are heavy in their own right, and there's hundreds of them. And putting them off and on again, also bringing them as deliveries off and on trucks. But they still had to have a certain weight so that it didn't look, clunky or, too lightweight, so they were sort of flying through the air as you lifted them up. So there was a balance in that, and I think we really got that right.
one of the things that Ron did is we would have these vignette meetings. And so we'd have a map of the base camp, color coded for where the tents were. And so we would take that map, and then we had all these photos of real research of a team unraveling hose, or what Emma's talking about with the bamboo pole, and a bunch of people carrying the bamboo poles with the pumps on them. And we would, Emma made these little tiny versions of the photos that we could stick onto our map and
Right.
sort of number them. And they all had a scene related to them, so that when we got to these scenes, and sometimes they're in the middle of the night, and so not as many art department folk around or whatever, the 80s knew exactly what background action was supposed to be happening in that moment. And there wasn't confusion about that, because it was all choreographed. And I think that really helped make every scene feel so full.
The whole atmosphere is so natural. It's so real. You never get the feeling when watching any part of that it's fake or staged. It always seems very realistic. Emma, I have a question for you, and it's one of the things that I loved at the very beginning of the movie is Rick's apartment.
Yes.
In his living room. Oh my God, it's like a teenage boy's bedroom.
It is, absolutely. And,
I laughed, actually. Look at this. I mean, this is just crazy, with him sitting in the middle of this disaster area with a kayak.
Exactly. This is once again the authenticity, and we had access to Rick's home, and when we were Zooming with him, every now and then you'd be able to say things like, and I don't think we saw it on screen, but sort of ask him what all the paperwork was up and down his stairs. And in Rick's chaotic, organized way, it's his filing system, so each tread represents a month, and it's his which is absolutely hilarious.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah, totally. And then the kayak in front of the fireplace was just fantastic. He had a drill press in the living room, of course, which 4 mates helped him drag in. It was important to get that right, because we knew Rick was coming out,
Sure.
and we knew he would be, looking at it. So we were able to, not everything was exact. Rick's actual home is full of primary colours, yellow, red, blue.
Oh, yeah.
It's quite bright. And this one was, Molly chose a slightly more, pared back colour palette so that we could see him and what was going on. But no, it was all the diving equipment that we put in there was legitimate and had a purpose. He's got a submersible, an underwater submersible scooter that he customizes a lot of pieces. So everything has its own sort of ism. So we spoke to a diving consultant who happened to know about this submersible, and it's not something you can buy. There are components that you can buy, but he's created it. So we went to the lengths of redoing that. So when he sort of arrived, he stood there, and that's always a lovely moment when you get that reaction. But Rick just thought it was hysterical. He'd walk around and go, "I've got one of those. I've got one of those. I've got that too."
I think it was to contrast with John. Yeah. So John, he was single, divorced, or in this case, maybe we made him separated. I don't know, separated, divorced, and he has the most professional job of all of the divers. I think he was the most professional. He wore a suit to work, and his life was very ordered and neat. And we had a view. This does not look like his real house, but it's the same idea as his real house. His house on an upper floor, and we needed it all to be on the ground floor for the action. So we sort of made his house a little bit different, but the idea of it is the same, which is like he bought all the furniture in one place, out of a catalog, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And he's not super interested in what's on the walls. He didn't have a lot of family photos or anything like that. So, but it was a great way to contrast their personalities, the going back and forth.
It's such a wonderful statement right off the bat. You get it. You understand who these men are just from the way they live.
Yeah. That environment was really it was absolutely informed by the way they lived and who they are, and just to show that very quickly on screen. And even with, it's not something we see there, but music choices speaking to them just all go into that. Rick is a Pink Floyd man, whereas John may listen to Phil Collins every now and then, just these sorts of things that really help inform a lot of choices in there.
One last thing I'd like to discuss before we wrap it up is the Thai house interior.
I was hoping we could talk about that because she did such a great job with that one.
The interior of that house it seems so authentic to me. Emma, did you have photo research for the interior of the house?
Yeah, we did. We had quite a bit of research of family homes, and also some of the individual family homes through documentary footage. Some of the families of the children in the cave were interviewed in their own homes afterwards, and you could sort of glean from what was in the background and on the walls what would have been relevant to that part of Thailand. Also, we did get a good load of smalls, objects, furniture, cooking implements over from Thailand. You do get them here, but there's not a massive variety, and it can be regionally specific. So we did that, and we did the graphic application on the tiles in the patio area as you enter. That's just something that feels, when you visit those areas, you don't find in your own backyard. So that was graphicked. The wall hangings, a lot of them came out of Thailand. We had Lek, who was able to place certain elements and all the shrine elements in the correct places. We'd done our research, but it was so wonderful to have him there to just go, oh, yeah, it'd be a bit higher. We only place these three things out here on, at certain times. So that was all correct, and good to have that sort of squared away. And also just the craziness of all the colours and the textiles and the plastics. That's just such a part of the world over there that that was fun. There was a lot of fun to have all of those, contrasts and different sort of textiles and plastics thrown together.
I have to say, ladies, it's an incredible job. And
Thank you.
obviously
Thank
you worked with a lot of very good people. You got a lot of good information, and it's just marvelous. And I have I've been waiting for this to talk to you about it, because when I watched the movie, I had so many questions. So it's been really a good conversation today, and I thank you for it. And anything else you'd like to say? Any words of wisdom?
I'd just like to say thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Thank you all. It was really nice. It's great to talk to you. And, Leslie, get your eye on it. To hear that you thought it passed your bars.
Exactly.
It did remind me, the house there, the birthday party reminded me of our time in the Philippines, Molly. Yes, right. So
yes, I thought about that a lot.
Plastic and fabrics as well.
And rain. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much. And for the Set Decorators Society of America, this is Leslie Rollins SDSA signing off with thanks to Emma Rudkin and Molly Hughes. Very good work.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Inside the Set with Set Decor. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and visit our website, setdecor.com.